Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Right. All right. Item number 7, public comment on non-agenda items. So we'll start with anybody on Zoom that has a public comment that is not on the agenda tonight.
So we do have a few members, but nobody is raising their hand.
Okay. Anybody in? Okay, Mr. Chapman, go ahead.
Once again, Byron Chapman. Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members, as well as city staff. Mayor, directed at you specifically, you're at the halfway point of your mayorship. And I, along with many other people, I drew the short straw, but it could have been the long straw for me. And that is that you've been doing an excellent job. Particularly those issues are with how the public is addressed. We've noticed things such as if something's said up here, whether it's in this particular venue or there's an item that we're discussing and there's clarity that needs to be made, you've not hesitated to make sure that that clarity is there. Unfortunately, until you arrived in your position, calling someone back or asking for clarification in the prior was unheard of. It was, hey, these are the rules, these are the regulations, and we're not bending. You proved that does work when you allow people to say what they have to say. There have been times when an individual was very compassionate about what they needed to share, and it just wasn't the 3-minute deal. And that's all appreciated. And so certainly at the first half, and we do have disagreements and things and issues, but aside from that, the way in which the meetings are conducted, I certainly speaking for others as well, in that it's a more comfortable, more relaxed scenario. And I think that also adds to the fact that it allows people who've never been in this venue or coming up to speak in front of the dais. It makes them a lot more comfortable as well. So thank you very much and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. You're very kind. I appreciate that. Are there any other public comments in the council chambers? No? Okay. Thank you. All right. Item number 8, the consent agenda. All matters on the consent agenda are considered routine business and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the city council or resident requests a specific item be removed from the consent agenda for separate action. Any items removed will be considered after the remainder of the consent agenda. So do any of my colleagues wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? I think we all agree no, and anybody from the public? Mr. Chapman? Okay. Are there any others? Anybody on Zoom? No? Okay, so we will pull 8E and then I will accept a motion to approve the rest of the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
Okay, roll call.
Yes, Councilmember Joyner,
Yes.
Councilmember Carlskin,
Yes.
Councilmember Lauritsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Silhai, and Mayor Andriata.
Yes. Okay, item 8E, waive full reading and adopt by title ordinance 1047B of the City of Lincoln, amending section 13.04.360 to the Lincoln Municipal Code establishing water connection charges, and ordinance 1048B and the City of Lincoln amending sections 13.12.050 and 13.12.060 establishing sewer connection charges and appointment. Mr. Chapman, what was your question first before we have somebody give a report on this?
Again, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Mhm.
I understand the packet and the information and the reason behind this, and I'm kind of seeking more of a question. I brought this question up when we were talking about the lighting and the other issues for the districts. I noticed in the verbiage here, and I brought this up at the other meeting, is that when these connections dealing with water and that sort of thing, and these date back decades, and I brought this up before and never got an answer, which is whenever the engineering department is referring to standards, cost index and that sort of thing, it is referred to the San Francisco Construction Cost Index, which is the CCI. I would really like to know why we still use that. I mean, it has been in place for decades. If anybody's ever been to San Francisco, either done business, visited, stayed there, lived there, the costs in the Bay Area are so much higher than they are here. So I'm really trying to figure out why that is still used, because unless I miss my guess, labor is cheaper here. Materials, I would think, were cheaper here. So if those, however, the city can make that more pleasing for a business to come in here and work, that's just another tool to bring them here and reduce the cost of them doing a business. So that's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Sean, I don't see Travis here. Do you want to take that?
Yeah, I think we have somebody from Coastal, but I think I could just answer the question because this has come up for me many times in my career, probably from members of the public and from council members, all of whom have been very frustrated because he's correct that, obviously the cost to do public works type things and really anything in the Bay Area is very different than it is here. However, the short, simple answer is that there is no better alternative. There are other alternatives that exist that are much more regional, but what we find actually is some of those actually are even greater numbers of inflation. And so this is the one that kind of keeps us as close as possible. There was a push years ago by the Central and Northern California Valley to create a separate index, and it just has never been completed, at least to my knowledge. So I think that's pretty much in broad strokes the answer, but I could probably shoot you some white paper information on that. It's been written about extensively.
Okay, thank you. Right, are there any other public comments about this item? Okay, does staff have any questions or comments? I mean, sorry, council have any? Okay, all right, then I'll take a motion to approve 8E, please.
Motion to approve.
Roll
Yes,
call.
Councilmember Joyner,
Yes.
Councilmember Silhai.
Yes.
Councilmember Carl Skint,
Yes.
Councilmember Lauritsen,
Yes.
and Mayor Andriotta.
Yes. All right. Item 9, public hearings. We do have one. So 9A, number 1, conduct a public hearing for the 2021 Placer County Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan and recommend that the city council determine that pursuant to the CEQA Act guidelines, section 15096, section 15162, and section 15164, there is no substantial evidence requiring the preparation of a subsequent negative declaration or an addendum to the existing CEQA initial study and negative declaration Lincoln Regional Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, adopted by the Placer County Airport Land Use Commission on September 22nd, 2021, and adopt resolution 2022-171, approving a general plan amendment to amend the land use and circulation diagram of the City of Lincoln General Plan 2050 for consistency with the 2021 ALUCP. And Efren is going to be, oh, hi, Mel, how are you? You
Good,
both
thank
going to
you.
do this for us? Okay, awesome. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Council. Mel Pavilinis, Planning Manager. Just here to quick introduction on this project. This item was previously recommended for approval by the Plan Commission about a month ago. Tonight, we have Efren Sanchez will be presenting a quick presentation on the project. We also have a representative from the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, David Malco, here in the room for any questions you may have. So, but that said, I'll now hand it off to Efren.
Great, thanks, Mel.
Thanks, Mel. Good afternoon, City Council. My name is Efren Sanchez, Senior Planner with Community Development Department. The project we have before you is a general plan amendment to modify the land use and circulation diagram of the general plan for consistency with the 2021 Placer County Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, ALUCP. The purpose of today's hearing is to provide the public and City Council an opportunity to comment on the proposed general plan amendment, request City Council consider the Planning Commission's recommendation and public comments during today's hearing, and conclude with the City Council taking action on the proposed general plan amendment. A little bit of context. On June 10, 2014, City Council approved Resolution 2014-105, which established compatibility zones around the Lincoln Regional Airport. The compatibility zones closer to the airport have more restrictive land use criteria by prohibiting certain uses such as schools and requiring smaller and or less populated buildings. While those areas further away from the airport and flight path have fewer restrictions. This was the first time the ALUCP compatibility zones were incorporated into the land use and circulation diagram of the general plan. In June 2020, the Federal Aviation Administration approved the current airport layout plan. The prior airport layout plan was the basis for the 2014 ALUCP. The one significant change from a compatibility planning standpoint is the type of approach at the south end of the runway. This change results in a larger runway protection zone and thus the need to amend the ALUCP. In September 22, 2021, the Airport Land Use Commission adopted the 2021 Placer County Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that governs the 3 public airports in Placer County. This document supersedes the 2014 ALUCP. The need for the 2021 update initiated primarily because of the new airport layout plan and the FAA approved 2020 for the Lincoln Airport. On June 15, 2022, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing and unanimously approved Resolution 2022-12 with a 6-0 vote. Resolution 2020-12 allowed the Planning Commission the ability to make the required findings to support the general plan amendment and forward the matter to City Council. The 2021 ALUCP contains 2 changes that directly affect the City of Lincoln's general plan. First, Compatibility Zone A is the only zone that changed as part of the 2021 ALUCP. The Compatibility Zone A expanded due to the increase in the size of runway 33 and its runway protection zone, as illustrated in the FAA approved 2020 airport layout plan. The expanded compatibility zone involves the main Lincoln Regional Airport parcels and 2 unincorporated Placer County parcels that are currently in Compatibility Zone B1 of the 2014 ALUCP. The new 2021 ALUCP also includes a new wildlife hazard critical zone and supported policies that prohibit future land uses or site features that have the potential of attracting hazardous wildlife. Flocks of birds are hazardous to the airport vicinity as they would otherwise interfere with aircraft during a takeoff, in flight, or landing at the Lincoln Regional Airport. This policy prohibits future proposed uses such as new or expanded wetland mitigation sites, conservation areas, and or wildlife preserves within 10,000 feet from the existing and future runway ends. So as you can see here in this illustration, the image to the left, you have Compatibility Zone A, and it's sort of in a rectangular shape. And so with the new proposed 2021 ALUCP, the shape of that would create this sort of like triangular shape. It kind of flares out. And so that's what the change of the actual change would be for Compatibility Zone A. And then this is an illustration of what Compatibility Zone A will look like once the general plan amendment is approved and adopted. So as before, you had the, just the regular rectangular shape, and now it will be like flared out this way. The other change that came about with the 2021 ALUCP is the image on the left is what the current land use and circulation diagram of the general plan looks like. And then the image on the right illustrates a new wildlife hazard critical zone, which extends 10,000 feet from the existing and future runway. The wildlife hazard critical zone boundary is at the edge of Compatibility Zone C2, but within Compatibility Zone D of the airport influence area. So you can see here that bluish greenish outline that will be the new wildlife hazard critical zone that will be implemented into the general plan. And that's another image just for more context. So environmental review, there is no substantial evidence requiring the preparation of a subsequent negative declaration or an addendum to the existing CEQA initial study negative declaration that was prepared for the Lincoln Regional Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan adopted by Placer County Land Use Commission on September 22nd, 2021. Staff has determined that this general plan amendment is within the scope of the 2021 ALUCP project. The map revisions do not produce effects to the environment that are not already analyzed under the scope of the CEQA initial study negative declaration. Therefore, no further CEQA environmental analysis is required as stated in the CEQA findings included in the staff report. So that goes on to our recommendation. Staff recommends that the City Council conduct a public hearing for the 2021 Placer County Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan and recommend that the City Council determine that pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act guidelines, section 15096, section 15162, and section 15164, there is no substantial evidence requiring that the preparation of a subsequent negative declaration or an addendum to the existing CEQA initial study and negative declaration prepared for the Lincoln Regional Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that was adopted by the Placer County Airport Land Use Commission on September 22nd, 2021. And 3, adopt a resolution 2022-171 approving a general plan amendment to amend the land use and circulation diagram of the City of Lincoln General Plan for consistency with the 2021 ALUCP. So at this point, if the City Council has any questions, we're here to answer. And also David Malco is here as well.
Great, thank you for that. Appreciate it. All right, we'll start over here. Councilmember Lordson, do you have any questions?
No.
Bye.
I don't have any questions right now.
Okay. Questions?
I'll be doing the same. We'll wait until after any public comments. I do have a couple of questions, but as this passed through the Airport Land Use Commission, I got a chance to review it in its entirety and it was unanimously approved. Then I suspect it probably will be tonight as well, but I've got some curiosities based on a couple of things you said.
Oh, yeah.
Carlson, you want to wait? Okay, all right, well, let's go out to public, open public hearing. So are there any testimony on Zoom?
No hands are raised,
Okay,
Mayor.
how about in the council chambers? Okay, Mr. Chapman? Oh,
Good evening, members of the City Council of Lincoln. David Melko, Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. Also the staff person for the Airport Land Use Commission. Encourage you tonight to approve the general plan amendment with the changes to the compatibility zone A shown on your land use and circulation map, as well as to incorporate within your general plan the new wildlife critical hazard zone. The Airport Land Use Commission adopted the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan update in September. In October, your staff brought back and with a request that that the Airport Land Use Commission make a determination of consistency with your general plan and the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan that occurred in October. That's required by state law. The Airport Land Use Commission found the general plan consistent, subject to 2 conditions, and the 2 conditions are what's proposed as part of the general plan amendment. Once you make that determination of consistency here and incorporate or adopt the general plan amendment, you all will be responsible for reviewing airport land use compatibility concerns with respect to development proposals within the City of Lincoln around the airport itself. The only thing that would still come to the Airport Land Use Commission in the future would be if you modify the general plan or if you modify the zoning ordinance. So rezones of properties or any zoning ordinance that is an area-wide, city-wide effect that would affect properties within the airport influence area. So those 2 types of things would sort of change the context with respect to the general plan's relationship with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. But other than that, the city staff would be responsible and your body would be responsible for handling land use airport compatibility issues with respect to development proposals within the City of Lincoln. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
thank you very much. Do you have questions for him now or you want to wait? Okay, Mr. Chapman, go ahead.
Once again, Byron Chapman, Madam Mayor, council members, city staff, and those here, and those home. I read through this packet as well. A little bit of information about how I know what I'm about to share with you. One, I've been a private pilot for close to 22 years. Flew in different types of planes. It was terrific. It was fun. It was great excitement. Flew into small airports, large airports, you name it. Also was a duck hunter for about 25 years. And the flyway that does come through this particular area, it happens from the Williams area, a little bit further north. There's quite a few refuges out there in the bird count. And I think we've seen various movies and things and real life that when birds are involved with flying aircraft, particularly if they're, well, any engine really, but particularly jets, boy, just to see a few birds or a flock of birds coming at you, it's like all hands on deck. I mean, you got to do some major things in order to keep from doing what you're doing. The big part of it is oftentimes they don't fly in a group. They may be a small group and you can't see them until it's almost too late. So that's a consideration you need to do. But I bring a little bit more attention as I read through this packet and I looked at the diagrams. And the one thing that was not covered in here, it was mentioned, but it wasn't necessarily in detail, is it seems as if this packet and information covers it as, okay, here's another change with Placer County and the airports. As the council knows, and I don't know if everyone does, but there is litigation taking place and has been for the Village 5 area, which is due south of the airport. It's not a done deal. The litigation has been going on. It's getting to the point where I think things will come to a head. But I think all the players need to know that this is an issue, because when I read this, it kind of cried out to me. It says, these ALUCPS contains land use criteria for allowable density and intensity of the land uses for the new development to protect public health, minimize the public's exposure to safety hazards and the airports. There are many people that are out there. There are generation farmers and families that live there. In Plains, even though you have a north and a south in this particular scenario, you don't always land coming in on that south runway or that north runway. It does depend heavily on particular small airplanes, which way the winds blow. Jets, not so much. They pretty much can handle that. So if the airport is extended, I would really hope that Lincoln gets a portion of that business, because it is vital. And anytime you extend a runway, you allow other planes to come in. So with that, this is not a done deal. There's litigation taking place here, and it needs to be noted for that particular reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. All right, any other public testimony?
Mayor, we did have a hand raised on Zoom.
Okay.
Albert Schreiber, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, Albert Schreiber. I guess I'm just confused on a few things. First of all, I've heard many times from planning commissioners, council members that, got to follow the general plan, especially when it came to Village 5. And now you're changing the general plan again. So a little frustration on that. I was also wondering if these documents were part of the Village 5 EIR, because it seems to be kind of step-staired here, where in 2014 you approved the airport, 2017 you approved Village 5 and the development around the airport, and then 2020 or 21 you're back to expanding the airport. So it seems like you're trying to do both. And I know in the staff report, it mentioned at least one time there wasn't any opposition to what you're doing here tonight. And, when Village 5 went through, and other times, there's been plenty of opposition to, if you're going to build and expand the airport, don't build around it. But here you are doing both. And as far as the CEQA, not needing to do any more CEQA, I don't understand that either. I don't know how you increase the runway so you can have bigger jets, which is what the staff report said, and not have a noise change in noise. especially, to the people that are going to be living around the airport. I mean, I've seen it, heard about it over and over where airports shut down because they allowed building around it. One example is that airport museum or whatever was thinking about moving to Lincoln because the airport they're at had so much development around it, so many complaints from new development around the airport that they wanted to move. Now that kind of dropped off the face of the earth, but that proves the point that you can't have both. But yet here you are trying. I don't get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schreiber.
No.
Okay, one last call for chamber. Okay, close public testimony. We'll bring back to the council. Would you like to start? Either one of you want to start? Any questions, comments?
Okay.
I tried to start over here. They're pushing over.
You do. So you think? I don't know. We'll find out. So David was pretty clear responsibility for this now shifts to the city of Lincoln. Does that mean the liability shifts with that as well? Or simply the decision-making process and determination of compatibility or not?
I'll let Christine answer the liability question, but I suspect she'll say is that we always have had liability at the airport. And the second part to your question is the answer is yes, some more local decision making.
We've always had liability, but typically what has happened is if the city, our city or any other city that has an airport overrides an airport land use commission's determination, and they take on full liability, and the airport land use commission no longer has a role in that. So I just wanted to make sure there was no total shift of that at this point, as long as we remain compliant with that ALUCP. I'm fine with the responding if the mayor is.
Yeah. Oh, yes, go ahead. Yes.
So there were a couple of questions there. So liability, and then of course there was comments about Village 5 and also comments about expansion of the airport. So I'm going to try to tackle all three for you.
Good.
So on the liability issue, Councilmember Joyner, you probably remember when we had the workshop back last summer, we had an extensive discussion about the liability issue. And of course, just like-minded people, attorneys have different opinions on the issue. But the city owns the airport, and so the city has, a degree of liability with respect to ownership of the airport. And then, of course, when we had the discussion before the Airport Land Use Commission about if the city, whether it's Auburn or Lincoln or even Placer County, overrides an Airport Land Use Commission, whether or not, the liability shifts. And I think the general conclusion was that there is some shift in liability, but the liability doesn't entirely extinguish with the Airport Land Use Commission because people will sue whoever has deep pockets. So, and as our attorney at the time pointed out, it's a question that really hasn't had a lot of case law with respect to Airport Land Use Commissions up and down the state, and hopefully we don't invent it here. And your attorney could elaborate further, on the subject. With respect to Village 5, so Village 5 is a specific plan, and it requires rezoning, and it requires general plan amendment, to your general plan. And so it came before the Airport Land Use Commission back in 2017. And the Airport Land Use Commission reviewed it and determined it consistent with the 2014 general plan, subject to a variety of conditions. Now, at that point in time, the specific plan was a draft. And so it went through, as far as its evolution in terms of the final specific plan, including the final environmental documents, and those conditions were included as part of the overall improvement of that particular project. And so that specific plan, to a large degree, responds to airport land use compatibility concerns. And so that's where we are at this point in time. That I'm assuming that project has been approved. And if that project has been approved under state law, that's considered an existing use, existing land use. And the Airport Land Use Commission has no authority to go back and regulate existing land uses. So the only way that we could revisit that subject would be if that particular specific plan undergoes some sort of an amendment. And then it would have to come back to the Airport Land Use Commission. And as I noted in my previous remarks, general plan amendments and rezones still have to come back to the ALUC. Thirdly, okay, so with respect to expansion, in 2007, your city council adopted an airport master plan, looks out 30 years, it's required by the FAA. And your airport master plan included runway extensions and a second runway. And that's been the basis ever since. The Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan has always taken that into account. So the compatibility zones, and when we look at noise and safety factors, we're taking into account that future airport environment. And so with respect to going back to Village 5, we looked at all of the issues with respect to noise, safety, airport land use compatibility, with the context that the airport would eventually have 2 runways and an expanded runways as well. So all of that was taken into account. That's the same set with respect to the 2021 Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. So what are the changes? So under the FAA sort of planning process, they don't really like to fund master plans too often. It's kind of like general plans. You do them once every 10, 15 years. You know, it's perhaps should do it more frequently if you're in a planning circle, but you know, there are always budgetary constraints. So they have a process where they do airport layout plans, and they attach with that what's called a narrative report. And you think of the airport layout plan as a way to update the airport's capital improvement program. So you typically do those every 5 to 7 years. So you did one in 2012, and that map was used as the basis along with your 2007 master plan for that 2014 planning effort. You updated the airport layout plan again because, you know, timing of particular facilities and development, hangars, those types of things, you know, sometimes they get pushed back on a timeline, sometimes they get pushed forward, you know, for a variety of reasons. And so that was kind of the subject of the 2020 airport layout plan. With that, you also kind of look at the airport fleet mix, because over time, general aviation aircraft change, a little bit more jet aircraft activity, different types of commercial activity. And so that needs to be taken into account. So that's why with the general plan amendment, when it shows the compatibility zone A, there's a flaring out of that zone. It's because to account for this changing fleet mix. Certain planes require more airspace or more space on ground to protect, you know, the runway and the airport. And so that's why that particular change was put into place. Now, with respect to the hazard, wildlife hazard critical zone, that's something that the FAA put in place and emphasized with airports and started conditioning airport grants, and your airport receives federal grants. And so bird hazards are becoming an issue, and we're in the Pacific Flyway here. And of course, we work closely with the Placer County Conservation Plan, and we made comments on that plan. And our comments were incorporated into the planning documents and into the EIR, EIS that require that they conform their plan with the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. As part of that effort, we dealt with the Department of Fish and Game. We dealt with the Ag Commissioner. We dealt with the Placer County Flood Control District because of flooding of lands, you know, or detention basins. It can attract birds. And we also dealt with the Groundwater Authority because when you recharge, you have water standing for a certain amount of time. And of course, once again, that attracts birds. So all of those people were brought into the room, and we were able to craft the policy that's in the plan to be able to respond to the various concerns. And so what you have is a set of compromises that yields the policy that's in the plan in terms of protecting the airport, which is, you know, an important economic asset. And so that's why you have that 10,000 foot buffer. Lastly, on the CEQA issue. So these conditions that were placed on your general plan were included as part of the CEQA review for the Lincoln compatibility plan. And same was done for Auburn and same was done for Blue Canyon Airport. And so that's why, so CEQA was reviewed. And, it's a determination on city staff as to whether to use our CEQA document as a responsible agency and whether it's adequate. And I gather that your staff has determined that the effort that we did was adequate. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions. That was a lot, but hopefully I tried to keep it kind of simple there.
It was a lot, but it was very useful. I
appreciate
appreciate it. So here's my other curiosity, and I recognize I'm probably drifting a little bit off of what's in front of us. It's as we began talking about bird strikes and the hazards that arise from that. We have wetlands on the airport property itself. We have riparian habitat on the airport property itself. Theoretically, it would be good to be able to mitigate that and mitigate it elsewhere, obviously, and clear up that worry. Every time I've asked about that in the past, I've been told we can't do that. So I'm curious as to why we can't do that, and if there would be, if we can, if there is federal money to assist us in doing that.
Well, as I understand the FAA circular with respect to wetlands on airport property, that's not something that is it's strongly discouraged. I don't want to go to the point of saying it's disallowed, but it's something that in terms of the compatibility plan, we indicated that within the zone A that falls within the round of the airport, it's not something that
Not a concern.
they shouldn't be developed as wetlands. I mean, they may be natural wetlands, but to promote it, right.
Right.
And so,
That goes without saying, but
right.
it would be nice, in my mind, to be able to reduce that potential hazard even more.
Yeah, and I would think that it would be something that you could talk with the FAA about the funding on that, and that would need to be put into the various submittals for capital grants in terms of that programming and planning for that effort.
And John, could that maybe a mitigation for that somehow be folded into the retention basin project? Worth exploring.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, David. That was really helpful.
Thank you. Dan, do you have any questions? Turn your mic on. Turn your mic on. Turn your mic on. There you
The
go.
question I had is maybe a wording question that has to do with compatibility zone A. It says that the current Village 5 specific plan allows residential density in the range of 1/2 to 1/4 acre per dwelling unit, or dwelling units per acre. Understand that. But I don't understand this sentence. Both of the affected parcels are large enough to accommodate future displaced dwellings outside of the expanded compatibility zone. I don't know what the hell that means. Displaced. I understand the village
Yes.
residential zoning.
Well, let's see, in this illustration, this is better. So can you see me the screen? Oh. The part. Oh,
Okay.
okay. So in this diagram, you can see that the expanded area is that yellow flared out area. And so these are 2 residential parcels, the ones that I'm describing in that paragraph. And so the house, there's already an existing house. The parcel kind of like divides up here. And so on this property, you already have like a barn or some sort of shed. So you would be able to sort of accommodate if in the future this property owner were to develop, you could put a house on this other end and you would be outside of compatibility zone A. And then on this other side, the house is already developed, or this other parcel is already developed. And so there's already an existing house. And so that's what I was referring to. So it's already there. So that with revising compatibility zone A, it's for future uses. So it would restrict future uses.
So in other words, Efren, the two parcels that are affected are large enough to still realize, you know, some
the
type of
dwelling.
development potential on the very, very rural
Correct.
designation.
Yeah, and really low
Without
density.
moving.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So if it had been correct without the word displaced,
Yes, without having to
Okay.
displace it. Yeah.
that makes sense. Thank you.
That it?
Simple.
My only question, and it's just what implications, if any, am I not seeing? Like, what is the downside of us passing this? Is there one? What are the concerns that might not be on my radar and should be, and are there any?
From at least my review, I don't see any reason not to approve it. This is a very standard kind of routine exercise. And it just so happens that in this particular case, there is a large potential development to the south of it. And frankly, I'm glad that we're going through the exercise now, even though Village 5 was approved some time back, because at least it gives the ability for us to identify, for example, that issue that Dan just brought up, or other things that could potentially be, you know, conflicts in the future. But maybe Mike wants to speak to that.
The downside, and it depends upon where you sit and how you look at the issue. If you do not incorporate these general plan amendments and don't make those conditions, then all development would need to, that requires a discretionary approval, would need to go to the Airport Land Use Commission. Now, so that has a regional body that sort of wades into local land use decisions. Now, of course, as Councilmember Joyner pointed out, the city council can always override the Airport Land Use Commission. So I think you just need to look at it in that context in terms of regional body versus local review and approval. So that's the only downside if you want to look at it from that perspective. So,
Just slight restrictions, but not necessarily downside.
right.
Thank you. That's helpful. Sure. That was my only question.
You could also look at it as an
It's upside,
upside. It's
yeah.
going to bring it all
Right.
Yeah.
under our control and our review.
So is that really the bottom line, bringing it under our control? I'm a little confused about this whole regional land use thing. Like, what's the whole purpose of it anyway? I mean, isn't it, it's our airport, correct? So maybe you can educate me a little bit, Paul.
Well,
Or
David
David, okay,
will say it in shorter terms.
okay.
With more authority.
Long time ago.
Oh, boy.
Maybe not.
I
so
might be
specific.
wrong.
Yeah, a long time ago, the state, enacted airport land use commission's airport land use law, and it's evolved over time based upon as legislation reacts to events. Chris, there was an aircraft, crash that was pretty horrific, Executive Airport in the early 70s. And so that really sort of triggered what was in airport land use law to make it a little bit more restrictive in terms of how you looked at development around airports. And so it was with that law that really kind of established the purpose of airport land use commissions to develop airport land use compatibility plans and to be able to have some sort of role with respect to what is and what is not compatible development around airports. And of course, as we live in the real world here. And so as you go through legislation, there are a set of compromises that occur, even, as the legislation advances. And so the ability for local jurisdictions to override airport land use commissions was also part of that law.
recognizing, the local control factor. So the Airport Land Use Commission basically looks at a 2-mile area around your airport. It's called the Airport Influence Area, the outer boundary of what's called Compatibility Zone D. And so it sets into place recommendations, for intensity of, commercial and employment uses and residential densities. And it also includes other restrictions with respect to promoting safety and encouraging future development to occur in a manner that minimizes noise, within within residential units and office and commercial developments. And also to a large extent tries to recommend what sort of compatible uses can occur outdoors, within proximity to an airport. What types of uses are okay with airports, with planes flying overhead in terms of activities, and what are not. And so that sort of got crafted into law and to state guidelines with respect to developing airport land use compatibility plans. And it's a requirement within the state. And this state has basically developed airport land use commissions. Other states basically defer that activity to the State Department of Transportation. And so in that instance, all the reviews are done by the state agency. But here in the state, it's locally controlled airport land use commissions.
So I think the simple version is it gets another set of eyes on it. Ultimate Land Use Authority remains with us. SACOG is the Airport Land Use Commission for Sac County, for Metro, for all the rest. And so it's just another set of eyes looking at a potential risk threat. And then making a recommendation. We can either accept or reject.
Okay. Go ahead, Dan. Turn your mic on. Turn your mic on. Thank you.
If you read the staff report, the development effect was already handled in the existing specific plan. And I don't know of any changes in that area. The downside, if we don't approve this, is that we're going out and assuming a greater land use, possibly authority than we need to accomplish anything. And then therefore assume more responsibility, more liability. So as long as our staff, the development staff, the planning staff, and the Airport Land Use Commission have the interface that they've had for the last 8 years, 10 years, we'll keep in step and keep everybody out of trouble. As I said, this isn't really any different. In fact, has less changes to the general plan than the one we did 8 years ago. So,
Given the types of risks that could actually happen with airport operations, I don't have any issue with having additional experts and additional eyes to share additional liability for any catastrophic thing that could potentially happen out there as we develop around it.
All right. Okay. So if there are, Ms. Malkoff, did you have a comment?
I was just gonna remind you that we needed to close the public hearing.
I already did.
Oh, we did? Okay.
I did. Yeah. This was just us. Yep.
You could double close it.
I did. I actually remembered this
Yeah,
time.
I would have been passing her a note and she would
Oh
have
my
been irritated
gosh,
at
yeah.
me.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. Thank you. All right. So if there are no other comments or questions, then I will take a motion to approve or adopt resolution 2022-171.
I will make that motion. Second,
Okay, roll call.
Thank you. Councilmember Joyner,
yes.
Councilmember Carl Skint,
yes.
Councilmember Lauritsen,
Yes.
Councilmember Silhai,
Yes.
and Mayor Andriata.
Yes. Okay, thank you. All right, item number 10, general business.
No, no.
Huh? What?
Don't we have to We enacted all three things.
The first item was to conduct a public hearing. The second item was the CEQA findings that are included in the resolution.
Okay,
So the findings were made as part of the
Okay.
resolution.
Item 10A, receive an update on existing property owned by the city of Lincoln and provide general direction on creating a framework for determining which types of properties move forward for property surplus and sale. And so city manager Sean Skilly will give us a staff report.
Yes, hello, good evening, council. I'm going to do this up here tonight. I have, let's see if it, oh, there we go. Okay, so this is an item that actually has been brought up to me individually from most of the city council over my couple months here. And I was talking with Mayor Pro Tem Joyner the other day, and he mentioned to me this is actually something that's been directed a few times in the past, and for a variety of reasons that I'm going to explain in a little bit, it we haven't got across the finish line. But I do think that there's a way that the city can offload surplus property that's not that isn't going to serve any real purpose from a municipal perspective. And I'm going to step you through some of the available property. I think there's a misconception in the public that we somehow own much more than we do. The city of Lincoln is a major landowner in Lincoln for sure, but the vast majority of that land is either open space or parkland or buildings that are like this building. And so we don't really hold much beyond that, except for just a handful of parcels that even I'm scratching my head about why we still have. So I'm going to show you this map, which I know is not useful at all from like a presentation perspective, but I just want you to see that every area that's colored of any color, except for whatever that dark gray is land that the city owns. And so some of that's parkland, some of that's our wastewater treatment facility, some of that's the airport, like we just discussed, some of it's civic buildings, some of it's vacant lots. Some of it is property that was purchased for a reason and the project never occurred. And then some of them were acquired through land swaps or other deals that were made during the first round of pre-recession timeline. So this might help a little more. So Gwen helped me split this up into quadrants just to give you just sort of a general idea. So this, for example, this green slice here on the bottom of your PowerPoint is the old landfill. Obviously, a site that has significant challenges. It still is owned by the city, will continue to be owned by the city. You can take a look at there's little portions of right-of-way that are parcels. You have parkland. I'm going to go to the next section. Here's sort of the Del Webb, Sun City area. You can see that the majority of the land that we own that area and in 12 Bridges is either parkland or open space. If you move along, and this also shows some area of the downtown. It was kind of difficult for us to break these up, but there's two or three properties that this former redevelopment agency owned that the city owns that are, one of them probably is a tear down. It's a very old building, I think off of First Street, residential property. And then there's another one, I believe off of Third, that served no municipal purpose. Sorry.
I can tell you what it's, I know you think I'm the historian that needs to jump in here, but I seem to be the only one who remembers these things. It was acquired originally because there was going to be a bridge across Auburn Ravine as a bike ped connection, and that house would have been torn down and that street would have gone through, that connection would have gone through. So there was a purpose.
A reason why we don't.
If you're
I
talking
think it
about,
got-
if you're talking about the First Street
Yeah.
property, that's because the United States Postal Service built a very large building on the other side. So,
Right.
so
They
it
blocked.
precluded our ability to be able to make that road go through.
I'd forgotten that.
Hey, this is pretty good. You're the historian. Each one of these pieces of property that's not really in a specific use for us has a story behind it. And some of them were things like that that would have worked out in another timeline. And unfortunately, in this one, it hasn't. And so the question really for the city is, these are depreciating assets in that case that don't serve a purpose. And I've always been a believer that local government should only own the property it needs, and private industries should do what they do with the remainder of it. So another piece is up in Cata Vergara. There's, I believe it's 7 lots.
Sean, I don't mean to interrupt you. Do you have a cursor that you could show where you're?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Do I point this like at it? Oh, I do? That's cool. Oh, sweet. Can you all see that? Oh, that. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm just gonna walk over here. Is that okay?
If it's a laser, it won't work with these screens.
First Street property we were talking about is down here. This is the Cata
Okay.
area here.
So the dark green all the way up is McBean Park.
Correct, yes. And the reason why I don't have like specifically broke down parcels for you is that I wanted to get more into the discussion about how do we determine what is not worth keeping as sort of general policy framework? Because every single one of these will be brought to you under separate cover, all of the background detail, full parcel maps, all of it, to determine if you'd like to surplus it. But I wanted to, as you can see, we have a lot of property. And so I wanted to drill down to just the ones that we think are worth surplusing, and then talk a little bit about how that's going to work. In the Cata properties, my understanding from talking to previous staff is that the developer, when they were building portions of that project, offered the city that real estate in exchange for development fees. Not a deal we would probably do today, but they are basically finished lots. If you ever drive up there, you'll notice, I mean, they look literally like they could be built today. They are stubbed out and everything. So there has been some interest in those. So that's one other option. This is the northwest quadrant. This is the airport. We've already talked about the 80 some odd acres that's across the street on Flightline. And we're already moving on that since we've gotten separate council direction regarding that piece. And most of the rest of the stuff you see in here that as you go into the Foskett area is parkland or right away. And then southwest quadrant, you have Sorrento, Lincoln Crossings, you have our wastewater treatment facility. There's really no real estate that we could find in that area that was not usable in some sense, except for the piece of property that's on the corner right next to our fire station on Joyner, which is already in the surplus process currently. So with that, let's talk for just a really quick second about the most complicated part of this. Years ago, the first couple of properties that I ever surplused, the most you had to do was notice affected agencies and other governmental agencies like the school district and ask them, are you interested in this land? And if so, let's talk. And most of the time they said no. And then you went and sold it. And in those, during that time, there was very little reporting or oversight with regard to that. In 2014, the first of a series of legislation was passed that really tightened up a lot of those rules with the specific intent of trying to make sure that local governments were not offloading properties that could be otherwise used for affordable housing. In 2019, it leads us to this, which is, this is a lot of language here, but I think it's important. There are a series of processes that we have to go through to even get to the point of offering these properties for sale, including, before I get to that, the bill expanded the definition because it was typically just cities. And then they said, wait a minute, we have all these redevelopment agencies, successor agencies, housing authorities, JPAs that are all offloading property. And so we need to tighten that up so it applies to everyone. There was also a case about 3 or 4 years ago that clarified that even charter cities are not exempt from this. Expanding the definition of what constitutes surplus land. This was another sort of workaround. They limited what we could do to disallow commercial or other revenue generating uses. They narrowly defined what would be exempt. I'm going to go into that in just a moment. They also added requirements that we must make findings to either surplus the land before beginning negotiations for disposition. And then penalties, which I'll also talk about in just a moment. So let me come back to that. I want to, the reason why I'm sharing all this, because really this is sort of, if council decides you'd like to move forward in surplus property, it's really my problem to sort of work through all of that. But I want the council to understand that the effort should be done. It's best done, in my opinion, as a group. In other words, we bring to you, based on your direction, the properties we think have no purpose. We go through the appropriate procedures to declare them surplus, and then we go through the noticing procedures and negotiation for them. And the reason why I would suggest we do it that way is that it can condense that work into one package of properties versus having us go through that exercise one at a time. And I can tell you it takes a long time. You now have to, it used to be kind of you self-certified that you did all of these things. Now, Housing and Community Development will literally review. They want to see your resolution of surplus. They want to see your and screen check your notice, public notice that's supposed to go out to all affordable. There's a list that they have on their website of affordable housing providers that receive them. They want to know about the timelines. They want to hear. They monitor the entire process. And if we think that there's a possibility for exemption, that's not really very possible either. I've tried to go down that, even on a property that was very, very clearly federally restricted that could never have residential on it. We were basically told, sorry, you still have to go through the exercise. So the one component I want, and the reason why this is so important is that there's a section about penalty. And so what happens if we miss a step, we don't notice something correctly, affordable housing developer claims that we didn't negotiate in good faith, any of those. The risk of getting it wrong is that there's a penalty provision that requires the local agency to deposit 30% of the purchase price received in a fund to provide low-income housing for the first violation. The second violation of the act is a 50% of the purchase price received, and the same for any violation thereafter. HCD can assess the penalty if the local agency has not corrected the violation after being given 60-day notice to cure. However, it is important, I think, to note that the act does not invalidate the transfer or conveyance. So if, for example, we just ignored this provision altogether and sold a piece of property to someone that was the highest bidder, it still would go through and be effectuated. But if we sold it for $1 million, you'd have to take $300,000 your first time and put it into the Housing Trust Placer or some similar type agency, and then $500,000 the next time you mess it up. So the stakes are fairly high here. But with that said, now agencies are starting to get used to the process. There's some resources that HCD has provided. They do have staff that will respond to you and explain, so you make sure you're following the right procedures. No one has really wanted to get into the legal territory of testing this. And my memory is that shortly after this was put into law, that it was made very clear that those who didn't follow it would be called to the carpet for that. So just an example of how much time it's going to spend or it's going to take to do this. But it's worth it if we can offload properties that either could be a liability for us or could serve a better purpose in the hands of somebody doing a neat project on them. So here is the direction I'm recommending, and then I'm going to just sort of listen to your feedback. I think that the test for whether or not we move forward with surplusing property should be we commence with agendizing real property negotiations for properties that are residential in nature or serve no immediate public purpose and are not part of future plans for civic or municipal space. Pretty simple, pretty definitive. If it meets that test, we put it on for you and you decide if you'd like us to move forward with the process. If it doesn't, then we don't. And obviously, we'll bring forward each property individually and you can determine whether or not that makes sense. As we stand here today, the ones that I have based on just sort of my preliminary review are the small residential parcels in the downtown area, the parcels that are up in Cata, and the unused airport property across the street from the actual airport. And we are working with the FAA on that specific and the First Street property. Yeah. So that's sort of that's generally the presentation. And just to be clear, because I'm not sure that I was, and I want to make sure the public understands that the intent of the Surplus Land Act, to be really clear, is that affordable housing developers get first crack at purchasing and developing those properties, regardless of whether the zoning code allows it or the general plan does. That does not necessarily mean that if you go out and solicit RFP and someone comes in with an idea that the council must accept the offer. But there are only 3 provisions, and I'm pulling them up here. Sorry, this is a very long statute. There are only 3 ways that you can not accept an offer, and the primary one that most agencies use is if price and terms of the purchase are not sufficient for one or both of the bodies. But there is some consideration when council's deciding if you'd like to surplus something, just knowing that the first round before it goes to the wider public will be affordable housing providers. And so that's just something to be realistic about.
Okay. Thank you, Sean. All right. Questions, comments?
I was just gonna say, I'm sure that Sean is already all over it and was just saying the 1486 for convenience sake, but the guidelines that came out in 2021 are much, much more comprehensive and limiting and longer. They don't have the force of law, but I don't want to test it.
Yeah, basically in that year, HCD decided to really basically make some administrative interpretations of 1486 and have created a series of steps you have to follow now. And I'm not aware of a legal challenge to that yet. I think that they're sort of followed at this point.
Very new. And their guidelines out of that agency do not have the force of law. They don't have a public comment process to it, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't lose in court. So I don't want to be the first one to bring the challenge. Just wanted to make sure that we're following all of it.
Yeah, those 7 parcels in Catavadera, that's in a gated residential community. Would that have to be offered as affordable housing?
Yep.
First, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so here's the reality of it, though. I've worked on a number of affordable housing projects. Affordable housing projects, for them to truly be successful, need subsidy in almost every circumstance. And so there's a practical part of this. It's not that you just because you put it out that affordable housing developers are necessarily going to purchase it, right? Because it may not pencil, especially for the market rate that happens to be in that area of town. But yeah, you have to offer to them first. Yeah. And here's the other thing. It does not, and I didn't confirm this with Christine before the meeting, but my understanding, at least of the laws, it does not mean necessarily that their project would be approved. That's a separate local control zoning land use. It simply means that they have the right to purchase it.
Thank you.
So can you say that you will use market rate as your minimum settling point. Is
Yes,
that legal? I mean,
yes.
that's not a
So
view
market
that,
rate for a Catavadera lot is
Yeah.
something quite different than.
no, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Um,
You can do that. You can also,
and not be perceived as being against the spirit of the legislation.
correct. And in fact, I think there's separate legislation that requires that a government get market value for their real property unless you find an overwhelming public benefit like an economic development project or affordable housing, something like that.
Interesting. Well, it just causes, especially those lots cause the wheels to spin, don't they? It's obviously the neighbors could potentially be very upset about it, but the market rate brings something in. Yeah, the market rate balances that out a little bit. Then in my mind, I begin to explore auxiliary dwelling units or a percentage of affordability within a larger project. How does that play out?
My understanding of the Verdera lots too is that there are CCNRs that overlay those parcels, and were there to be a build on those parcels, they would have to annex into the HOA. So that's also a cost factor that would get tied into the project.
Yeah, all very limiting.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from council?
I think, but Sean's presented as far as the process is
Mhm.
reasonable, logical, and
Sure.
probably the way we ought to go.
Don't really have much of an option but to go through that process, so.
But on the other end, it forces us to take a look at buildings that we may not consider to be surplus, but we're also not planning a future for.
Right.
And take some serious considerations of what we want to do with those and make those future plans if feasible. So.
Yeah, I like that we're gonna just be, getting our house in order and looking at it, and I think the plan you presented makes sense. I also think that in terms of like the Surplus Land Act, there's a bunch of, hoops. But it really is to catch up cities that are bigger than us and agencies that have more resources than us. It's for people who have shorelines and who have large assets that could be used for, solving the state's problems. I don't think that we're wanting to get rid of it. And we're not going to be the type of sites where we're going to have huge conflicts. Most likely. Hopefully I don't eat my words on that, but most likely.
It really isn't.
It's
too
not a
many.
thing for us.
We don't have enough really large scale
Right.
kind of parcels that would be appropriate. So I'm not,
It literally came to be because they wanted to build affordable housing over a subway and the transit agency said, no, you don't get to because the air is mine. That's where 1486 came from. We don't have any of those issues. I think it'll just be a pain in the rear for staff mostly,
Which is.
which Dan's fine with, by the way.
Okay,
I mean.
And I
you know,
sympathize for you.
It would be great. It would be great just from a practical perspective to just not have those on the books any longer. And then you do get proceeds from those and you can use them towards a
Yeah.
variety of purposes.
well, that was going to be my question. What is that money that can go in the general fund or they have to go specific places?
Well, it depends on the source of the purchase. So for example, if you surplus sewer wastewater property, it should go back to the wastewater fund if the wastewater fund purchased it in the first place. The lots up at Cata, I suspect what we're gonna find is that we have to fund them back to the PFEs that were credited.
I think you're right.
But still, though, that's a liability, right? That's a liability on the books. And unless the council decided there was some better purpose for those lots, then, there's no reason to continue to hold them.
Okay,
That I could think of.
all right, let's see if there's any public comment on this item. We'll start with Zoom. Gwen?
Mayor, I don't see any hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, anybody in the council chambers? No? All right, so we'll bring that to council. So, I think you have your direction to go ahead and go through that process and bring those to us and we'll be excited to see what comes of that. Okay, thank you guys very much for all that. All right. Item 10B, 2-year mayoral rotation discussion. Sean, you are up again.
Let's go back up here. So Gwen and I put this back on as to keep you behind the curtain. You know, many meetings, we have an awful lot. Kind of scramble to get it all on the calendar, and then some like this one. Is there anything that council had this discussion about a mayoral rotation? Options. Go take a look at some illustrative options and circle back to us so we can continue the conversation. So what I want to say before I get started tonight is that the presentation you're about to hear is designed to be conceptual in nature with regard to the structure of how you decide to appoint a mayor in Lincoln. Now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, if it's not changed, and so on. So with that, let me show you a little bit about how we see things that occur locally, regionally. You have basically district elections, which we are now in Lincoln. If you have an elected mayor, you see that there's two options. There's a strong mayor, which is essentially an executive of an organization that also has voting power. Only a few cities in California have those, and they're typically the largest. And then you have ceremonial, which is, they lead the meetings and are typically the spokesperson for the organization. And then in our particular case, we do not have an elected mayor, and many cities have no identified process. They simply nominate them annually or biannually. The council choose amongst themselves who their mayor and mayor pro tem are going to be for that year, and they vote. Alternatively, there are appointment processes by rotation or sequence. Typically, you see the vice mayor after their term move into the mayor's seat as they've been working alongside the mayor during that time. Some places it's by seniority and coordinated with election cycle, and based on the election date and order finished within each election. So I'm not going to read all of this, but this is essentially how our rotation currently works. It's filled by an incumbent with at least 2 years of service, and 2 newly elected council member is placed at the bottom of the rotation list. If more than one new member, the ranking of order of the new council member shall be in relation to the number of votes. Member with the highest votes are immediately below incumbents, second greatest below the first, and so on. Following an election, previous incumbent mayor shall be placed in the rotation above the newly elected council members and below the other incumbent, including incumbents who are elected. Incumbents shall stay in their position in the rotation relative to other incumbents even after re-election. And then you can see that there's also a protocol. If 4 to 5 new individuals are elected to the city council, those individuals filling positions with shorter terms remaining shall be placed at the top of the rotation list in order of votes received at the election. Council members with longer terms shall be placed below at the shorter term of the rotation list. So you can see it can be kind of complicated, but it was written in a way, nearly 25 years ago to account for how you would deal with these various situations. But this is written in a time when you were at large, right? And so we are not that any longer. Okay, so now let's see what else we've learned. Okay, Northern California cities with district elections, you can see these are mayors that are not elected. You have 7 council member scenarios, Chico, Redwood City, Santa Rosa, and quite a few charter cities. You have the 5 council member scenario as is Lincoln, charter cities like Roseville or general law, and you see quite a few, even some locally, Citrus Heights, Davis, Lodi, Woodland. The general law cities in Northern California with 1-year rotations, if we're just going to talk for a second about 1 year versus 2 year, are Campbell, Citrus Heights. The council in Citrus Heights selects one of its own members to serve as mayor for 1 year. Concord, council selects one of its own mayors and vice mayor to serve for a term of 1 year. Davis selects one of its members to serve as mayor and vice mayor for 1 year. Lodi, elected by the council annually at the first regular meeting after the election in even numbered years, and at the first regular meeting in December. Menlo Park, the city council meets in December of each year and chooses their own. And the same for Woodland. You see quite a few with that model. Chico has a rotation based on a council nomination of the two. So the city clerk opens the floor for mayor, a vote is taken on each one in alphabetical order, and the first person to receive 4 or more votes is appointed, and the process is then repeated for the vice mayor. We talked about Redwood City. Actually, I haven't mentioned them yet. They select one of its members to serve as mayor and vice mayor 2-year terms at the first meeting in December of odd years. They then take public comment for both positions and open the floor to nominations. They take a vote, beat the process, and so on. Newly elected go to position after all incumbents who haven't served as mayor. So this is sort of their way of creating some equity. And then you can see they have provisions that that line up depending on their unique circumstance. Here's Roseville, highest vote getter in 2018 election was seated as 2-year mayor. City clerk draws lots from remaining districts, excluding the mayor's district, to determine 2-year vice mayor. After every general election, a vice mayor shall be treated by rotation in sequential order of the districts, and the vice mayor shall rotate to mayor at the end of the 2-year term. After every election or vacancy, the city council shall elect a 2-year mayor. In odd years, the city council shall elect a 1-year vice mayor, cannot serve in consecutive terms as mayor, and if a vacancy, selection will fill remaining terms. And you're not barred from consecutive terms, which is actually kind of interesting because that's a little bit unique from what we found. And so those are like a sampling. It was very difficult for us to find because as we looked at a variety of cities, it really was dependent on, first off, you had to find cities that didn't have an elected at-large mayor. And what we found with the vast majority of our sampling was that if you ended up in districts, most of those communities chose to have an elected at-large mayor. And having gone through it a few times myself, one of the reasons that I recall that decision had been made in some places is that cutting up a community, especially one that's less than 100,000 people, can be complicated to make sure that you're into 5 districts. You want to make sure you have enough people in each district to elect somebody and have people run regularly. So that was the most common model we saw. As you saw in the presentation, there's a lot of cities that simply just the council chooses amongst themselves. It's been remarked to me that there is the potential for some conflict if that were the case here, that you may have people that all want that role, and if you are in a 2-year term and someone doesn't get it, you might create sort of an unnecessary flashpoint. I suspect that has a lot to do with the culture of the council and the culture of the organization, but I suspect it happens. So really, that's the general research we did. We can do a whole lot more, but what we found was every single one was very unique to their own community, and so therefore I think Lincoln's needs to be unique to it. And we're really just here to get some feedback for you so that we can go back to Christine and I can work to build the code section to amend it for the upcoming year and moving forward, or not change it at all. Either one's fine by us. And I can answer questions, or I can listen and take notes, or both.
Okay, so thank you for that, Sean. So I think there's actually 2 issues that we're dealing with, right? One is are we all in agreement to do 2-year rotation? And then how do we, then setting that aside, how do we do that? So am I correct in that? Are we talking about because we originally started talking about doing 2-year for continuity and getting more things accomplished instead of just 1 year.
Correct. Yeah. So the direction we would need is term and process.
Process, right? That's,
I think out of this, there needs to be at the minimum one decision, which is what is the process? Because the process is much different because we're in districts than it was in when we picked the order of new people on the basis of number of votes. That was fine when they were all fighting for the same vote. There are districts are going to change in number of voters. So that's not valid and it's no longer valid. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing is rotation. I mean, whether 1, 2,
yeah,
4 years,
Right.
whatever. 6 months. I think they're all open.
So you're saying that because districts are supposed to be relatively close in the
They all
number of
start
voters.
very close.
But what you're saying then is doing the highest vote getter doesn't work.
And just to clarify, so the way the districts are drawn, it's based on population. It's not based on registered voters. And so you could have one district that has equal population, but a greater percentage
My
of
district
voters.
Is families. And
Correct.
so lots of kids.
And then we've also got all of these new housing complexes that are going in, and those homes and voters get automatically put into whatever district they're drawn into. And so your voting population in each district, I think you're going to see dramatically change over the next few years.
Gwen and I also did explore a little bit the concept of percentage of vote.
Yeah, per cap, yeah.
Per district, which there are other issues inherent in that, right? Because if you run unopposed, how do you, I don't know that qualifies the same as someone that's running against an opponent, but so it's complicated.
You have to build it in. It's no more complicated than if it were most votes gotten now. They would probably go to the bottom of the list. They'd have to. Solving for proportion could work for that, but I hate our current statute, so I'm all for changing it. I think that it was very poorly written. The one that we have right now. I don't like it.
I don't know that we've always followed it.
I don't like it,
honestly. We've had the sense of a rotation, but that whole calculation, while the city clerk may have done that, the rest of us anticipated what the rotation was. You're looking at the
Right.
rotation, right?
I had, just to answer Holly, because you said that you split it into 2. At the last time that we spoke, I had concerns with making a decision about a 2-year, but at the time I knew I wasn't running for reelection. Holly is up, which means conceivably she's off. Paul is in the middle of an election, conceivably he would be off. So then why are we making a decision for a future council that might have a majority vote change? That's no longer the dynamic because there are at least 3 majorities staying. So I no longer feel like we don't have a right to decide to change a policy this close to an election. Because it would only be 2, potentially 1 cycling on. So that concern for me is gone, and I like the 2-year idea. I have significant, I'm a policy wonk, right? Like it has to have the right guardrails for me. And I'll wanting to listen to all of your comments first, but I will just throw out there that when we went through the initial redistricting, not this last one we did, the first time we did it, and I made the case and died on the sword for the at-large mayor for all of the reasons that Sean stated, nobody wanted it. And then when we just did it as a individual commission, they could have changed it to that and they did not, which means that no one on council wanted a 4-year mayor, and the citizens who just structured us also did not call for a 4-year mayor, which means that I would have very significant issues if whatever we come up with does not also have the same restriction that Santa Rosa's has, which says that you cannot serve consecutive terms. Because if we had the opportunity to be voted in for a 4-year term, then we should have done it. So that's my biggest one. And then I have a bunch of other ones, but I'd want to hear everyone speak first.
I like part of what I think it was Roseville did, which is the first election, in our case, would be 22. The vice mayor is picked at random.
Yep.
And that starts a rotation that doesn't change regardless of votes or anything else. Now that postulates it postulates something that says that theoretically a person can be vice mayor the first day they're on the council.
I like that personally.
With 2 years, I don't have a problem with it.
Exactly.
1 year, I do have a problem with
We
it.
could,
Certainly as mayor. I think.
we could also do, I liked that too, by the way. But you could also do taking from somebody else's that said that the mayor had to be at least 2 years on at random drawing to start out the cycle, that drawing is from existing individuals who've been on
How do
council.
they handle the rotation then?
Theirs was top vote getter. It doesn't work here, but you could say draw at random from existing council members who have served at least 2 years to start the mayoral rotation. Draw at random from the remaining council members who didn't get selected as mayor for the vice mayor one, and have that in perpetuity then as the, cycle moving forward, but then put a provision in, and this is where it gets to like the policy, right? I like the idea of having this kind of expected, but also the authority and ability to say, nope, right? Like you didn't do anything during your vice mayorship, or you've been very contentious on the council and we don't want you to lead us, where it has to be voted. Like I would like for it to be like kind of that automatic assumption, but have to be a formal vote so that the council is very much approving it and can also say, no, we want to draw at random again and start this, or whoever, so that it's not.
Well, I think whatever
Guaranteed.
we decide, we should have the caveat in there that the council has the ability to approve or to change, right? Whatever it is, because you might have someone step into the office and then end up being a train wreck and the council has to change that or say, no, that's not
Right,
good for the
say we're
city."
not, there has to be like a hook built into it, but I also very much would love to have us have something built in similar to Roseville, because from what I've seen in my day job, working with a lot of elected bodies, it can get very ripe for contention if it's constantly someone is vying, they're always wanting to like lobby their peers so that they get elected mayor at the end of that term. And it causes unnecessary conflicts on all kinds of votes that could be like very, rudimentary business. They become now grandstands or points of conflict just for that one cause. And I don't think that serves the public any good purpose. So if you have that kind of expected rotation with a hook built in, that means that everyone kind of knows that this is the way business goes unless you absolutely do not deserve it. And that's when you're going to be called by your peers and we're going to start the process over. And I think it takes that always vying for a title away. Not that every council is going to do that or body's going to do that, but some do.
Well, I think it goes to what Sean said, that it has a lot to do with the culture of the council, right? I think, and I know we're, right, and I know that we're not all going to be here forever. It will change, but the culture of this council, I don't see that happening here or in the near future. So I think you just have to kind of have that expectation of this is the process, but it's not, we're not going to let it get political or get nasty or whatever. So, I mean,
But I think we have to write it. We have to build it, not for us.
right.
We have to build it for people we don't know in 10 years. And like, when we came in, it was a very different culture before. It was a 3-2 split vote all the time. The culture of this council is so much different than the culture that you guys had to operate under before we were on. And that changed in a few years, which means that in a few years, it could change for the better or the worse. It really just depends who the public votes in and who runs, who their options are. So I feel very strongly that if we're going to write a policy that, this has been 22 years before it's been looked at again, and I didn't like it the whole time. that I've been on, right? It could be another, at least probably 10 years, because now that we're at districts, every time the census comes up, there's an opportunity for that body or however they organize it to relook at the maps and relook at the process, and then that might trigger it. But we're looking at probably putting in the process for a city and council culture and dynamics and all that stuff that goes with it for at least 10 years. So I think we have to write it pretending that we aren't involved. It doesn't apply to us. It doesn't apply to our culture, and make sure that it gives a structure that's not going to cause unnecessary conflict, that's going to serve the purpose that we want, which I think, as you said, is the 2-year giving. We've all, well, 4 out of 5 of us have now served as mayor. It takes a hot minute to get it under your feet. There's no more authority, but there is a lot of obligation. There's a lot of new things, and people contact you more because no one knows who the council member is. But if they're upset about something, they Google the mayor, right? It takes a while to get your feet under you. So the 2-year cycle should potentially be of benefit to the city, right? And so I just want to make sure that whatever we write into it actually serves
It
that
also
purpose.
gives you a tiny bit more influence regionally.
Right, it does, because you have some of that continuity on those boards that only accept the mayor on it.
Right.
So I just think that if we write it well, that we can solve for problems in a good way without creating new ones. And if we write it without looking at unintended consequences, we could potentially create issues that don't exist currently.
Bill.
I was just going to suggest, why don't we just make it simple that the mayor serves at the will of the council? You know, a bit like a parliamentary system, you know. The mayor would always have to have the majority of the council with them or her.
You mean that, Bill, that they would be appointed by they would be voted in by the city council and could
Yes.
be removed at any time by the city council?
Basically, you know. It's almost like a prime minister, like, you know, what happened in England is, you know, he lost, you know,
That as a guardrail works, and then build the rotation around it. We would have to like create what that looks like. I like the idea of using that like random hat. It takes all the politics out of it, particularly if you have that like, no, that's not happening, built in on the back end. So it's kind of like you have this like, all right, here's where we're going to start the suggestion, and it still needs to have at least 3 votes on it. And I think that there needs to be the expectation that the 3 votes are not just like oh yeah, it's just what we do. It's is this who's going to be leading our city for the next 2 years? Because as you're aware, even though you have no more authority, whoever conducts this meeting sets the tone for the city. They set the tone for a lot of things. And so 2 years with someone who does that catastrophically, one, staff could get real burned out real fast, and it could cause issues. So
Councilmember Saw, to Councilmember Lauritsen's comments, so like what you're saying is there's some, at least you would be somewhat open to this concept of being able to remove that.
like when we were talking, you were saying that as a guardrail, right? Where it's okay, we're gonna vote one in, but there's gonna be something in it. You serve at the will of the council, which means that you're gonna have to be voted into that seat. And if at some point during that 2 year,
Maintain a
you're
majority.
going to have to maintain approval. And if it goes haywire, we go to the vice mayor and start over.
Like the new mayor.
Yeah, I actually like that
Yeah. and-
as a backdoor.
Right. And I think we need to be careful about, I mean, I'm for that, but we also need to make sure that they can show cause, right?
Oh,
Like,
yes.
you can't just be like, you made me mad today, so I'm gonna like rally my colleagues and kick you off,
Well,
right?
but if you need a
It's-
majority,
Yes.
It's hard to
I'm
get
just
3.
saying that you can't just willy-nilly like, vote a mayor off because someone's mad at them. There has to be like, you have to have reasons, right? You can show examples of poor leadership or things like that. I mean, I agree with, I want that hook in there.
right?
100%, I agree with you. I'm just saying that just to clarify Bill's language, at the will of the council, sure, but it's the same concept of why teachers have tenure when they get to a certain place, because you get, the right parent to complain, or you get a vindictive principal, and you could fire a really good teacher for personal reasons. There has to be a process, right? And I'm not saying it has to be that difficult. I'm just saying that, yes, there is the hook. The council can yank it, but they have to present a case for cause.
So I would have to say that my vote would be closer to Bill's open language for these reasons. If you start specifying why you can remove someone, what happens if something isn't on that list?
No, I'm not
Then
saying
you
make a
can't.
list. I'm
And
just saying
I
make
feel
it.
like if you can get 3 sitting council members to completely like have a public debacle where you actually removed your mayor, the mayor's not doing a good job, whatever it
Yeah.
may be. Because if you're getting 3 people on a council to be willing to do that,
But to
It's
your point about
contentious.
how councils can get nasty and political, right? If 3 people get together and they want to remove a mayor because of personal reasons,
So to your point,
yeah,
you pointed out that past councils were 3-2 on everything.
yeah,
And those were very contentious. And that could have very easily
yeah.
just been this continuous loop back and forth.
I'm
what if it had to be removed by a supermajority? Like all 4 non-mayors,
For removal for no cause.
all 4.
All four.
Yep,
Okay,
all 4.
all right.
Because then that brings in,
We really hate you.
Yeah.
right, no,
Yeah,
I'm all
no, that's-
100% for that.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
You could say for cause 3, for no cause
Or
unanimous.
That's fine.
Oh, or no.
Yeah, I would recommend against cause. I think
Just
cause is
say
very
all 4?
subjective.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the chief right now because I'm thinking about how difficult disciplining employees are for cause, and that it becomes a semi-judicial
thing.
process. I think the idea of create the guardrail really could be a supermajority.
Yep.
I mean,
Supermajority.
because Frank, I was just asking Christine, the council really, if you decided today, you could remove a title.
Yeah, and it
I
wouldn't
mean,
require a
there's nothing that
supermajority from our
prohibits that in
statute.
the code. So
Agreed.
you could choose to do that if you wanted to.
And I
Yeah,
think
to
we've
your-
always understood that we had that
But to
authority.
your point, Paul, it was a contested 3-2 all the time, and that didn't happen, and it would have been a simple majority vote had they wanted to. I think that if you get people in this seat, who even if they do not liking each other, who are running because they want to run the city right, uprooting a mayor, it doesn't serve the public right. It doesn't look right, which means you got to get 3 people who either really, really hate each other and don't care about their job, or someone's not doing a good job.
Right.
But I like the supermajority guardrail.
I like that too. I think that solves a problem. Okay, let's see what the public has to say about this. Anybody on Zoom?
Mayor, I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, anybody in the
Oh,
council?
I'm
chambers?
sorry. I
Oh.
did get a couple.
Hold on. Mr. Chair.
So Lena, go ahead, please.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. You know, if you all were in those seats forever, I would trust you all to choose a mayor when each time would come up. I think you're working together really well and doing an excellent job. I agree with Mr. Chapman that Mayor Andreatta is doing a wonderful job. And I don't see why you couldn't start your process like within the next 2 weeks, if you can come to terms on how your process is going to work. You know, it's a little bit complicated, but I think you'll come up with something, you know, like I said, if you were all sitting in those seats forever, it wouldn't be as big a problem, but we never know when the seats are going to change. So I'm trusting y'all to come up with something really good. Thank you.
Thanks, Lena.
Thank you. Albert Shiver, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening again, Albert Schreiber. So I guess Ms. Lebowski and Mr. Chapman both kind of stole a little of my thunder. So I'll just say I like the idea of the 2 years. I think that's a good idea. I like the supermajority idea as how to get there. Some of the other stuff is like a hot potato. I don't know how to comment on it because you're still kind of jumping around on it. But that being said, to piggyback off of Mr. Chapman and Ms. Lebowski, I think Ms. Andreatta's got more stuff done in her short time than a lot of mayors do in their whole year at the position. I know some of that stuff was getting done prior to, Miss Andriotta taking the position, but I think the combination of Miss Andriotta, her different approach, and Mr. Sully's, coming into his position have made a huge difference, at least from the outside looking in my opinion. And so if you're going to kick this off with somebody for 2 years, I would like to see Miss Andriotta be that first one to continue what I feel she's doing a good job doing. Thank you.
Mayor, no other hands are raised on Zoom.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. Mr. Chapman, go ahead.
Once again, Byron Chapman, live in the 12 Ridges area. Madam Mayor, council members, city staff. My philosophy on a lot of things is if it's working, don't fix it. I understand and I've heard the information about at least 2 on the council have said, yeah, I think 2 years, I didn't have enough time on that first year to get things going. But over time, what I've seen is eventually what takes place, and it hasn't been brought up yet, is that you will and do have council members that have been a council member and mayor and have come back around and have been mayor again. That's terrific because now you do have that embodiment of being around long enough and seeing what's going on. All of you are 5. Okay. I understand that by have that 2-year career, but even right now, you're in new territory because now each of you have a district. And if each of you take that year at this point in time and see how those districts work out in the way of voting and how that works, then I think you need to come and address the issue. I'm just thinking you're maybe just a little bit premature because you haven't really crossed that threshold yet. When those houses get built out, that could make a major significant difference. And now you might be back at the wheel trying to do it all over again. The information and all of the guidance and leadership that takes place here is very, very good. I'm just looking at if that's an alternative, then I guess go with it. But I'm thinking that the council has always had the ability to share information, agree, disagree. I'm just saying if it's not broke, don't fix it. At least until we get this whole deal going with the districts and how that works out. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chapman. Okay, yep. Go ahead.
Mayor, I'm sorry, I did have another hand raised on Zoom. Whitney, go ahead, please. Whitney, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, Council. I agree with everything that Alyssa was saying. You don't want to accidentally or inadvertently change a protocol that could make things more political and add more consequences in that regard. My only question is, do you, from your experience on council, do you see any disadvantages to only having 2 council members serve in the mayoral position during their 4-year term? That's it.
Thank you, Whitney. I'm mulling over her question.
No, well, it's,
Yes. Yeah.
all you have to do is look at Roseville.
Yeah.
The majority of council members would never serve as mayor. And as a result, the depth of your bench and knowledge is reduced. And very often what you see with Roseville, because they have a weird setup where they do have term limits. They're good for 2 terms. Then they have to stand down for 2 years. Then they can come back and you see the exact same individuals over and over and over again, becoming vice mayor and then becoming the mayor for 2 years, rotating off, swinging back in. And so it's very limiting. And again, that bench, that depth of knowledge and experience on the council.
That's a good point.
there any more?
Yeah,
public
Richard wanted to say something.
Richard, can you undo the?
Is that good now? Thank you. Council Richard Pearl, Lincoln, speaking as a private individual. This is a great discussion to have, and I think it's probably long overdue. I looked at a number of cities in our population range where we're at 50,000 and then where we're going up to 100 plus thousand people. I think that looking at the process that we had in the past where Lincoln was a very small community, nothing was going on. It's similar to what happens in a lot of other communities around the state. They're not growing, they're not very complex. We are the antithesis of that. We are growing, we are very complex. And I think that it takes a little bit more time and seasoning, as the mayor pointed out, to gain an understanding of what's going on within the process of the council meeting in order to help better to lead the council and the community. And so a longer period of time allows you to do that. The first couple of months in any business, any organization you're in, you're learning the job. In politics, the last couple of months, you're a lame duck and it's very hard to do something. So that interim part is where you can actually help to bring some leadership and apply some vision and then work with the rest of the council to work that program. A one-year mayorship, I think, doesn't allow you that flexibility, doesn't give you that depth to move forward as we continue to grow in a very complex society. I looked at 17 cities from 50 to 125,000 people. I think of the 17, 16 were all districts. 7 of them were voted at large for the mayorship. That means that 10 were voted by the city council. The majority of them, 8 of the 17, almost a majority, half, were 2-year terms, which is exactly what you're talking about. 3 of the 17 were for 4-year terms, so that's a little bit unusual, and 6 were for a 1-year term. So, it all depends on, there's a lot of flexibility, but I think we have to look, as one of the council people talked about, we have to look to the future. How do we envision the city? How do we envision the leadership? You are all going to be replaced at some point. How are you going to put, you talked about the guardrails in there so that there can be a consistency going forward and do the work of the people in just with a little bit more of framework and a little bit more of experience. So I applaud the discussion. There's a lot of variables here. Putting the different types of guardrails in. I think no matter what we do, we're going to end up better than what we have with a 1-year straight, almost straight rotational system. Any city that I looked at, none of them had a 1-year rotational system. So I think that's something to keep in mind as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, appreciate that. Okay. That's everybody, right? Okay, I'll bring it back. Any other comments or questions? So
I do.
Oh, go ahead.
You finish.
No, go ahead.
I think that Mr. Chapman might have just thrown a wrench in for me. I was worried before about creating, a new protocol when there might be a majority of council who's not coming in. But I do think that he has a point, and maybe it's just something, maybe it doesn't change it, but maybe it's something we really need to consider. Because I know that when we were looking at the maps initially, which is why I really wanted to have like 4-year elected, the districts is, right now we only have, we're still at large. So yeah, it's a majority district, we're still at large, and it's changing the culture. So you were used to being elected at large, you're still serving with the exact same mentality you had. So really it's like, you have one person who was voted from a district at no fault of your own. You just weren't here at large elections, and 4 who are used to operating as a cohesive body. Districts can change the dynamics, and what happens, we don't know. Is it going to in Lincoln or not? To your point, that is a huge unknown quantity. We really don't know what it looks like. We don't know what that does to votes. We don't know what that does to people looking at the forest for the trees. Or are they really just always looking at their district? What happens if we do the 2-2? And to Whitney's point, now there's a limited range of people who have that influence and that depth in the bench, and they're always coming from one specific district, or they're coming from 2, and then we're disenfranchising potentially the votes and voices of a large segment. It's an actual It was a great comment. Maybe I like the idea of the rotation. I hate what we have. It doesn't work for what we're having. Maybe we pursue that with a 1 year until we really see what districts do. And if we need a 2 year, leave that to the future council to decide. I don't know, I need more time to think now.
Right, no, the combination of what Mr. Chapman said, something that I think Paul said, I'm going to agree with you. I think we leave the 2-term thing alone. Give it a full cycle of
On the
districts.
districts.
And it will be different next time for sure. You know, and the fact that people serve a year as mayor, they do learn. You know, they're maybe not as productive as a 2-year. I was hard over in 2 years until a few minutes ago.
Same.
That 1 year, I'm thinking back, although I had a very unique mayorship, since that it was the COVID mayor, I was a COVID mayor.
You were,
There,
you were an on-screen mayor for the
Yeah.
most part.
You really, in the different commissions or committees where the mayor, and I think that's important, that those are mayor and vice mayor, because you can cause community continuity
Yeah.
to happen there. I think the fact that if a person serves 2 terms, that person could be mayor twice, maybe, depending on how, or not. But I think having been a mayor makes you a better council person.
Definitely does.
No question of it, but you've all learned this. What you don't quite understand until you serve as mayor is that once you're sitting there, you're a consensus builder. You are trying to listen, to tie together what everyone is thinking and feeling and see if there's a path forward in which you can get a consensus. You take your own thoughts and to some degree shove them in the background and see how you can build that consensus. And you just don't know that until you're in that
But to
seat.
your point, I wonder, does that change when you're elected by a specific neighborhood, by a specific boundaries versus already having that I'm here at the will of the entire city to build consensus for all of these votes? I think I'm with Dan. I think we see. I think I want to see. I like the idea of putting all of the same things in place for a 1 year rotation and wait for the next full 2 year cycle to see what does that do to the bench up here.
I actually think that the 2 year idea, the benefits far outweigh the negatives. And so we could decide to wait, but the other part of that is, I think that it's up to us. And I think we've already started it. When we go back to talking about culture, yeah, we were forced into being elected by districts, right? And of course, we can't plan for, 20 years down the road if we stay in districts. But I think what we can do is we can create the mindset that we are only elected in that manner because we have to. It does not mean that we are only locked into caring about that district. To be quite honest with you, I know we were elected at large, but we are in a district and we got put in a district. To be honest with you, I like where I live, I like my district, but I don't think about just my district. I never think of it in those terms. And I know the rest of you don't either. And I'm constantly saying we all represent everybody. Anybody can reach out to anybody at any time, regardless of what district you're in. So I think that it's up to us to make sure that whoever runs, whoever comes on the council understands that is the mentality, that is the culture. Yep, you are elected by this area if they choose you, because that's the system we were forced into. But that doesn't mean that your attention and your loyalty and your work only revolves around that you are responsible for the whole town as the rest of the council is. So I think that's our job right now because we're the ones in it to create that mindset. Yes. Yes, and we need to make
You
sure
know,
that we
and
perpetuate that forward.
And our and our districts are small.
I mean, we really could write into our statute that to be able to serve as mayor, you're expected to be a consensus builder.
You're expected
Beyond
what?
that.
Just so like a general expectation,
are
you
the
sit in
mayor.
that role.
Yeah.
You're the mayor to the whole city.
So-
Yes.
Thank you. So while you may be elected to a certain district,
You're now the
in
mayor of
that
the
chair,
city.
you are the mayor of the
Correct.
entire city.
And
expected
to Holly's
practice.
point, that we place that extreme emphasis on what the mayor job is, that
Well-
it's the city's mayor.
Then we could go back to having coffee with the mayor any place we wanted to
Anywhere,
in the city.
correct. It's the city's mayor. It needs to be, it has to be. I mean, I
Mhm.
think that's a very good
Yeah.
point. It has to be. But I am very curious to see what that actually does once we start cycling off and people who are beholden
So
and want to be reelected
Yeah.
by their districts
I
are
actually-
on and
yeah.
and
I think that we are in a very unique place right now, that we have come so far through, we've cleaned up all the audit things. We have a really phenomenal city manager and staff. We are in a really great place, but we still have a lot of work to do. And regardless of who is sitting in the seat, I really think that the 2-year idea is important. And I think the benefits far outweigh any of the other things we've brought up, honestly. And I get what you guys were saying about, one more cycle, see how it works. But I'm thinking if you take to heart what I just said about, the whole district thing, and we figure out how we want that process to work, I really think it's the best way to go for continuity for the city and what's best for our residents. And instead of just keeping it the way it is to figure it out. Like, I think the benefits far outweigh any obstacles. But that's my opinion.
So if we were to go to a 2-year rotation, that structurally almost has to happen immediately after an election.
yes, it would have to
You
be,
can't
it
have,
has to be lined up.
right. It can't be an
No,
odd
it has to be
year, so
lined
it
up.
must play out that way. Otherwise you wind up with potentially someone
Has to be. It
not
always,
being reelected, and which is not about you, it's just in general structurally. Someone could not be reelected. Now they've served for 1 term. Now you've got to appoint somebody for 1 term to get back on
you
track.
also give the advantage to the city mayor who is always running mid-election against someone because they're the city mayor potentially of a 2-year term and
That's a fair
everyone knows
point.
it. What if we do this though, just so that we stop belaboring? What if, because it seemed like we were getting some momentum on what a rotation and what guardrails could be. We have to change our statute. It doesn't apply anymore. What if we direct staff to bring back something based on some of the feedback, right? In terms of what a rotation would look like, drawing it out of a hat for the mayor and the vice mayor, whatever you heard, right? Bring it back for future consideration. And at that meeting, we discuss if it's going to apply to a 1-year rotation or a 2-year rotation, because the process could look the same for either. And it seemed like we had consensus on a beginning, genesis of a process, and then let us chew a little more on the implications. I think that, to my own surprise, I might have just been put very firmly back in the camp of 1 year until we see how districts play out. But
goes back-
we don't have to make that decision
do
tonight because
not.
we still have to figure out I liked Bill's language. I liked the supermajority vote. Like, we had good discussions. What if we direct staff? I mean, how does everyone feel about that? And then we have the decision of 1 or 2 when we get to look at what it could look like. Would that work for anyone?
In general, so the 1 year, if you were to go to that, the rotation logically would stay the same.
But we can't. It's based on votes. And
It doesn't have
and
to
it's,
be. It
but
can
right
be-
now,
it
what
can
I'm
be
saying,
Based on.
right now.
We already generally know
Right.
who's in what district. You just rotate through that again.
I don't like it. I like the idea of having like a much more tightly written, expectation And then we could apply it to the same thing we're doing right now with the one-year rotation if we wanted to, and take the, top vote getter and where it falls into incumbent and new, and it's jumbly.
So
it's
my
dumb.
worry is that we make it too complicated. You're right. It was jumbly before
Yeah.
and we're heading in a direction of jumbly again. The simpler, the
I don't want
better.
it to be complicated.
Make
So
it-
simpler
make-
the better.
I just think, make it simple. You can have a 1 year or a 2 year, but the mayor is elected by the majority of the council. If you want to remove them, then you can make it a super majority, but just make it simple. Don't
Yeah, it's
confuse
just like,
things.
let's just start
The
it off
rotations
by-
doesn't work anymore because of the
The
districts.
district. So just start it off by drawing which district might be mayor, which district might be vice mayor for the first like full district election moving forward. And then we can decide once whatever you come up with is brought to us, if that we're gonna apply it to what we have as a 1-year term, or if we're gonna apply that to a 2-year term. And that way we don't continue, because I don't think it, unless y'all are ready to like say, no, I definitely want 2-year. I don't think I am.
What do you want to do?
I think it's a hard problem.
Yeah.
I think we'll throw it off on staff.
This is what I'm suggesting, and then they can bring it back.
I take notes in an email I send to myself when you have workshops so that I can remember what you said. And I've deleted Alyssa's section 4 or 5 times. But I think I have it. I think I've got enough now. And I think it'd be helpful for
Say
you
I'm
to see
open, I'm
language.
actually open.
Yeah.
It was a good comment.
I think it'll be helpful for the council to see language. And once you see language, you can start to amend, change, tweak. And then we can talk about that. And then completely separate of all that, we could talk about implementation, how you want to work that. So.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, I know you have, bring it back again.
Just one more thing.
You're welcome.
All right.
Don't hate me. 2 more times.
Yeah.
Maybe you could give just a teeny bit more direction. We put it on because one of the concerns that I had was that if this bled into, if we tried to like shoehorn it in after the election's over, then we don't have enough time to get the ordinance active and live on the 1st. And so is the council okay with us sort of trying to roll with this as sooner-ish, in
I
August,
agree with the
September?
timing. I think we need to
Okay.
have it in place in time to start
back
with
in
the new
August.
election in
Yeah.
December.
August or September, right?
Mhm.
August.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. All right. Item number 11, council initiated business. Before I do that, I wanted you to introduce Christian.
Yes, I am super excited to introduce Christian Svensk. He's our new community development director. He comes to us from the city of Sacramento. He also has worked for the city of San Diego, the city of South Lake Tahoe, and I think the city of Truckee too, early in his career. So he has a very long history of planning and development experience on large projects, small projects. And he started yesterday morning, and he's been drinking through a fire hose ever since. So we're very excited to have him, and he's looking forward to meeting each of the council members individually and anybody from the community that'd like to talk about community development. And I don't know if you want to say anything, Christian, real quick.
Do I need to speak in the mic?
Yep.
Very loudly. No, I'm just very excited to be here. This is an exciting opportunity for me. A city that's growing and working with Sean is going to be great. And so, yeah, just very, very excited, absorbing things, learning things. You learn a lot in these meetings, but so I feel like I've come a long way in just the last 2 days. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're very excited to have you. So welcome
Welcome.
aboard. Welcome to Lincoln.
Thank you.
Great. Awesome. Okay. Council initiated business. Anybody?
No, ma'am.
No? Okay. Any information items? Nope. Yeah. You got one?
Yeah, well, you and I
Oh, yeah.
have one. Holly and I attended the ad hoc, and Christine, the ad hoc homeless, what are we calling it now? Yeah. So what I'll say, and please jump in and add in if you feel necessary, or have something that you think needs to be expressed. For what, a year? Those were Zoom meetings that were very, very controlled, and Chief Alves was there as well. That were very, very controlled, very structured. You could not have a conversation. You could not speak in a round table sort of manner. And it felt very orchestrated. As we began this meeting, it presented in a very similar way, although it was in person. We managed to wrestle it away from the facilitators and have that open dialogue, that roundtable discussion. And I think for the very first time, we made progress. We came to understand one another, and the individual jurisdictional, I won't call them quirks, but I guess I just did. Auburn expressed that, yeah, your 10 by 10 camping ordinance would never fly up here. So we're all going to have our individual adjustments to whatever we come up with. But I guess what I want to say is that this meeting in person with the folks who were there finally began to be what it needs to be and what we wanted it to be all along. So I'm grateful. And
Yeah,
Mayor?
thanks to Trinity, Mayor of Colfax. She started that conversation and she's like, really thought that this conversation was going to be about the process and us be able to talk instead of you telling us what the process already has been outlined. And it took a few times to but you're right, we were able to derail the plan and it was very productive.
yeah, so what it did do was they had broken up the electeds into one group. The stakeholders who are on a daily basis involved with these folks into another group, and we were never allowed to speak with one another. And the simple ability to have all the chiefs in the room, to have the folks who run some of the county programs in the room and bounce things off of one another and have somebody say, I understand where you're going with that, but let me just tell you, as somebody who does this every day, that won't work, and here's why. Incredibly useful.
Mayor, one quick thing, because I'm not sure if you're going to mention it or not. The city of Lincoln is featured this month in 2 publications. Business View magazine did a story on Lincoln, is excellent, and I'll circulate it around. It just literally posted yesterday. And Comstock magazine has a feature on Lincoln this month too, so check them out.
So did we get the cover?
Thank you. No, we
That
did not,
did
but
not get the cover.
Didn't get the
Paris,
cover.
Texas
Got it.
did not either.
Good,
They did not. It was a whole nother.
good. Well,
city.
then that's a win.
Yes,
right?
it's a win. Yeah. But
Paris, Texas has a miniature Eiffel Tower with a cowboy hat on top, and
Yeah.
that was going to be the cover.
and
We couldn't have
And it
that.
didn't. No, it was lame. But it turned out really nice. Yeah. So thank you for mentioning that because I forgot to do that. Anybody else? No? All right. And that's it. Okay.
All right.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.